Let's go ahead and dim the house lights, raise the curtains, and take our seats. Today's explainer is a tale as old as time. Yet, honestly, it's profoundly immediate. We're stepping right into the flickering theater of the mind to examine the literal architecture of despair. It's a tragic myth played out on the stage of our very own ambitions. We're diving deep into the timeless narrative of the Dark Pact to dissect its psychological depths, and we're going to uncover some things you've probably never noticed before.
It's a paradox that seriously haunts our history, right? Why do we bar our heavy gates against monsters of fire and horn, but then so willingly invite the devil in for tea? Take the village of the ever-watchful. For generations, they stood guard against these jagged-toothed horrors out in the dark woods. But when darkness actually came, it didn't roar, it didn't shatter the iron gates, it just strolled right into the town square without a single tremor of the earth. How does a vigilant society let its absolute ruin just walk right through the front door?
Okay, let's dive into this with Act 1. The Unlatched Gate. The Quiet Arrival.
So, the most dangerous evil doesn't arrive as some terrifying beast. Nope, it arrives as the Crimson Guest. Picture this, an elderly man, elegantly dressed in a fitted red suit, sporting a hat with an exaggerated, incredibly theatrical feather swooping upward. He's uncomfortably human, perfectly ordinary. He doesn't rely on fear or force or terror. Instead, with just this subtle curve to his lips, he leans forward and offers simple, reasonable suggestions. He literally just sits by the local blacksmith, places a contract on the table, and relies entirely on seduction and rationality. He is just a pleasant, familiar guest masking an ancient rot under a veneer of absolute normalcy.
And his declaration, "I serve only what you want," well, that gets right to the heart of the horror, because he looked exactly like ourselves. His perfectly ordinary appearance was a living mask, kind of like the jesters who used to perform social commentary in the old royal courts. I mean, the villagers passed him in the square with a friendly nod, and that proves a really chilling point. The absolute most effective way to dismantle humanity isn't through alien terror, it's through familiarity. By acting as an emotional mirror to our secret cravings, the guest proves that true evil perfectly understands human desires.
Act 2. The Psychological Pact. The Internal Battle.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this seduction actually takes root. If we zoom away from the village square and straight into the weary scholar's candlelit study, we witness this quiet internal battle mapped perfectly onto the Freudian stage. We're looking at the very architecture of the mind here. The ego is our weary scholar, sitting among his scrolls, acting as the fragile mediator between burning hunger and the silent laws of the universe. The superego surrounds him, those suffocating books, rigid duty, the heavy restraint of peace. And then, right as his candle gasps its last breath, the id manifests. The Crimson Guest steps from the shadows, not as a monster, but as a charming mirror, whispering that he serves only what you want. The id is promising a direct shortcut to power, completely bypassing all those suffocating rules.
Which brings the ego to a devastating crossroads. The scholar has to make the fallen angel's choice. Rule in a void, or serve in the light. He's just so tired of being the small, rational middleman, feeling the crushing weight of his own insignificance. So, he makes his choice. Blind to the icy trap waiting just beneath the surface, he reaches out and shakes the guest's hand. He trades his integrity for power, choosing the grand rebellion of rulership, even if it means reigning over absolute emptiness.
And this brilliantly illustrates how our scholar's choice fits perfectly into classic tragic archetypes. This Dark Pact is basically an evolutionary step from the legends you probably already know, where Faust traded his eternal soul for forbidden knowledge, masking his tragedy in heroism, and Dorian Gray traded moral decay for eternal youth, hiding behind that flawless portrait. Our scholar trades his internal warmth for rulership and power. The cost? A frozen cavern of his own making. And his ultimate mask? He becomes the Crimson King, ruling as a man, but entirely, completely hollowed out on the inside.
Act 3. The performance of the two reds. The performance of masks.
Okay, so years have passed, the pact is sealed, and our guide, Mephistopheles, steps out of the shadows to act as the high priest of the psyche on this graphic novel stage. Let's really deconstruct the meaning of the color red here. For the Crimson Guest, red is the raw flame of unbridled desire. It's the costume of the seducer, promising that more is the cure for nothing. But for the scholar, who is now the Crimson King, his red is the blood of the internal wound. He's essentially become the sad jester. His red robes aren't a sign of power anymore. They're a theatrical mask hiding profound, hidden despair. It totally mirrors the desolate melancholy of the famous historical jester, Stanchik. The king wears red to hide the beast, while the jester wears red to hide the tears.
And here is the ultimate tragedy of his public duty. The scholar figured out that the more power he exercised over others as a king, the less power he had over his own hollow heart. I mean, he built an entire kingdom just to escape his insignificance, only to realize that the suffocating superego he tried to outrun hadn't disappeared at all. It had simply turned into a frozen cavern. That very integrity he traded away at the unlatched gate, that was literally the only thing that could have kept him warm.
Curtain call, the villager's mirror.
But wait, the tragedy doesn't end with the scholar on his icy throne. Pulling back the theater curtains to look past the stage lights, Mephistopheles turns his gaze entirely onto the audience, the complicit villagers. Picture a booming, theatrical voice echoing across the auditorium. Why do you cheer for the king in red? It's a massive taunt. He's directly challenging their comfortable complacency. Because think about it. If they admit the man on the throne is actually a shaggy, clawed beast, they have to admit that the peace and prosperity of their entire village is built squarely on the decay of a man's soul.
So, the crucial point is how the crowd uses the Crimson King's grandeur to avoid facing their own hollow hearts. They desperately cling to the comfortable lie. They are terrified of acknowledging their own internal corruption. Just like those legendary inner Nightwalkers they created, they completely ignore the darkness inside themselves. They're using the king as a vessel for their own greed. By watching him rule, they don't have to face the fact that they too would eagerly trade their souls for just a moment of heat in the cold. They willingly traded genuine human connection for manufactured joy, which just leaves them in a state of silent, gray despair.
And so, we arrive at the tragic twist. The scholar finally looks in the mirror. He doesn't see a powerful leader at all. He sees a shaggy, clawed beast trapped in the absolute coldest reach of his own soul. The true monster wasn't hiding out in the dark woods. No, the monster was born of the villagers' unlatched gates, born of the ego's doomed rebellion. The enemy was never truly external. Mephistopheles takes his final bow, and the red curtains fall over a king who gained the whole world, but kept nothing but the silence of regret.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder as the stage goes dark. If the monster in the mirror looks exactly like us, if the devil doesn't break down the door but waits politely to be invited in, who truly holds the key to the unlatched gate?